Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., President Biden is trying to push his $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill through, and perhaps he's warming up to the idea of bypassing Republicans in order to do that. So let's talk about $1.9 trillion. And here to help us dive into that figure is Sean Golhar, Barclays Head of Public Policy Research. Sean, so great to have you on the show. This price tag, $1.9 trillion, too big, too small, just right? Weigh in.
Great. Well, thanks for having me on. From a Barclays perspective, our research colleagues, we've been thinking about this quite a bit. When you frame the COVID-related relief that's needed, tracing program, and you begin to piling the other components, you do end up with what the president wants to go for with 1.9 trillion. You could remove some of those elements like state and local aid or the rebate checks. In our view, this more than covers the output gap. It'll help get us over, we think, the hump in terms of getting, continuing with the vaccination process that has been going quite well in the last couple of weeks here, and can help get it through this recovery process so we can begin to talk about not just emergency stabilization, but how do we get to an economic recovery? We don't see inflation increasing significantly, and I know that's been a topic of interest, I think, elsewhere. And I think the one question is, from a political standpoint, and other people have mentioned this, does this prevent the president and Democrats in Congress from moving forward on an infrastructure package later on in the year, perhaps with the next reconciliation package? And that is an open question, but if you don't get past this emergency stabilization, there's no way we're ever going to get to the infrastructure discussion.
Well, it's interesting. One word I didn't hear you mention was deficit. And we know that Republicans, even before President Biden was sworn in, started talking about the deficit, seemingly forgetting about it for the last 4 years. I think it's fair to say. It is a political thing, but do you think we should even care about the growing deficit? There's a school of thought, obviously, that doesn't think it should matter.
I mean, of course. I mean, if you look at the 10-year borrowing costs for the U.S. government right now, they can easily afford to use deficit financing to move forward. Under the reconciliation rules, which is what it looks like this package is going to go through, as a reminder for your viewers, there's a complex set of rules and procedures that Congress has to abide by. One of them is this deficit neutrality rule, whereby over 10 years, the policies put forward have to be deficit neutral. So you hope that the COVID relief package being put forward generates enough economic growth. And if not in those 10 years, you're going to have to add revenue raisers. We're all waiting, patiently for the CBO score to see how those components come in. But I think deficits in some respects are a political item. I mean, Ronald Reagan famously said the deficit's so big, it can take care of itself.
When you say revenue items, do you just mean taxes?
Yes. I mean, you could see tweaking the tax code on capital gains, on the corporate tax code. You could see removing various deductions. I have not heard a lot of discussion. I haven't seen a lot of discussion for this COVID-related relief package talk of removing the tax cuts on top income earners or on corporates. I think that is something in the Democratic agenda, but we right now don't expect to see that in this current reconciliation package.
Okay, so Sean, going back to this $1.9 trillion bill and then the different elements that you discussed at the beginning of our interview, is there one of them apart from the vaccination support that you think is the most important in order to stimulate the economy? And then two, when will we start to see the effects of that if this gets pushed through?
I think there's a lot of debate on whether or not the rebate checks are needed. When you look at the number of jobs that have been lost in this recession, you can imagine that, there is a lot of relief needed for individuals to move forward. I know households' balance sheets have gone up as savings have gone up, but there is quite a bit of a need, I think, for individuals to get those rebate checks. And obviously, it's very politically popular right now. The former president talked about rebate checks. Members of Congress have talked about it as well. So I think after the vaccination process, if we think about it, you could really interchange some of those other elements. State and local aid to help schools reopen and local businesses are obviously critical. Sometimes people parse that away from the state and local aid. Other people add that back in. But I think helping us get to a point where in the fall, schools can reopen, stadiums are full, we're back to in-person or inside dining, around the country, we're basically back to a situation where we're reopening safely. I think whatever we need to do to spend to get there is what the administration wants to support.
Can you talk a little bit about what you would do if you were in charge of designing this package?
It's an interesting question. I think very much focusing on getting the relief part together on the vaccinations, contact tracing, and building that in. Because right now we're watching this UK variant, and I know there's other variations of the virus around the world right now, South Africa and elsewhere, but we're really concerned about what we're seeing in the UK. And I know there's been a few cases in the US. The vaccination process has been picking up across the country, and it seems to be going quite well. But we worry that that could be derailed if this UK variation spreads in the United States and poses a bigger problem. So if in designing this, I think the argument of making it targeted, temporary, and timely, as a lot of folks often say, is quite critical. And I would basically be really focused on getting the money situated around that vaccination portion, because the entire agenda for President Biden and for the administration falls apart if you can't get past this emergency stabilization.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to vaccinations. We know the recovery is directly tied to getting this vaccine rolled out on a widespread basis. Sean Golhar, Barclays Head of Public Policy Research, thank you so much for taking the time and for joining us on Quick Take.
The biggest stories the moment they happen from around the globe. Subscribe to Bloomberg Quick Take now for insight in an instant.